My name is Ruby Carter, 33, a structural safety engineer and a former federal field investigator for building collapse incidents. I never imagined a wedding would turn into a rescue scene. But that night, under the glittering lights beneath the historic glass dome of the Whitaker estate, when the DJ began the countdown for the indoor fireworks, everything shifted in a way no one expected. Everett Whitaker, the 86-year-old founder of one of America's most powerful construction conglomerates, suddenly rose, leaning on his cane, and walked out to the center of the ballroom. In a dark velvet suit and with a piercing gaze, he turned straight toward me, a guest who had been seated at a table on the fringe. And before 300 stunned guests, he bowed deeply and said, "Tonight everyone will listen to her. She just saved your lives." At that moment, the large LED screen switched to thermal imaging. Hot spots appeared beneath the floor, the area of a gas leak, load-bearing cables that had been cut. From the rows of seats, people who had seemed to be servers rose, federal agents. Caleb Whitaker, the groom, was restrained amid screams. My sister Paige, the bride, was trapped backstage, the fire door locked remotely. Have you ever been underestimated by an entire room and then, in a single instant, every eye turns because you are the only one who saw the danger coming? Share a story of when others underestimated you and you proved your worth. Hit like, leave a comment if you've ever been pushed to the margins like I was. And if you want to know what happened before Mr. Everett bowed to me, stay tuned. I remember clearly the sound when the car door shut behind me. The electric taxi was so quiet I didn't realize I'd left the city until the blocks gave way to greenery and the black iron fencing. On the seat beside me lay a thick cream wedding invitation with a gold border, printed with my sister's name, Paige Carter, next to the surname that made it hard to breathe, Whitaker. We grew up in a shabby third-floor apartment in Milwaukee, where the night trains were a familiar soundtrack, and our parents worked 2 jobs to cover community college tuition for me. Paige was born the warmth of the household, gentle, always making people feel cared for. Me, I guess since middle school I'd been the one to walk into male-dominated engineering classes carrying a tape measure, a flashlight, and an expression that didn't break easily. But that day, stepping down in front of the Elms Conservatory, a vintage greenhouse once a biological tourist attraction, now refurbished by the Whitakers as a venue for upscale events, I felt out of place in a way unrelated to any technical detail. Out of place as if someone had replaced the entire framework inside me with glass. Everything transparent. Every look piercing through. They had staged a scene straight out of a spring wedding magazine. Tables draped in classic lace, strings of lights hanging from the glass dome reflecting afternoon sun like a rain of glass. White flowers with hints of gold coordinated with the pocket watches on the servers' vests. Everything was perfect, in a cold kind of way. I handed my invitation to the receptionist, a young man with glossy chestnut hair and a practiced smile. He scanned the list, nodded, then handed me a small card with table number 19. Table on the edge, east side, right by the white orchid display, he said, very polite but not friendly at all. I nodded, clutching my small clutch, my high heels making my steps stiffer than usual. Those weren't the shoes I wore every day. They were the pair Paige had chosen for me when she sent along my bridesmaid dress, after the groom's mother decided I shouldn't be a bridesmaid unless I had someone to escort me. I didn't argue. Not when Mrs. Martha Whitaker, the groom's mother, said at the engagement party, "Ruby is lovely, but she's probably better suited to behind-the-scenes technical work. The wedding should be left to people who, fit the style." I didn't react when she said that in front of Paige. My sister simply took my hand under the table, an apologetic look tinged with despair. I've never been the kind of woman who makes men look up when I walk into a room. I don't have Paige's sweet charm, nor the just bold enough while staying proper look the Whitakers describe in their etiquette guide for guests. I carry the bluntness of someone who has stood in the middle of a collapsing basement site, amid screams and falling concrete. I used to be a field investigator at the NTSB, and for 8 years I stood before burnt wiring boards, charred welds, steel columns bent like wire in a fire, answering the question, why did it fall? And then it fell. Not a structure, someone I loved. He was pulled down by a corroded scaffold whose failure traced back to a cost-cutting contract. 4 years earlier. An ordinary morning. I left the agency. I opened a small office advising on structural work for community projects. Not big enough to have clout, but big enough that I didn't have to bow to anyone who was wrong. And now I stepped into a space built to make me look like I didn't belong. At table 19, I sat with an older man with a weathered face and a Michigan State University ring on his hand, an older black woman in a purple dress with pearl earrings, a young Asian person tapping away on a tablet, and a couple who looked accustomed to being invited simply to fill numbers. We looked at one another, lifting our wine glasses quietly as if in the middle of an impromptu interview. When I pulled my chair in, the older woman smiled. "Sweetie, don't let a table number define your worth. Those young ladies were born to sit in the head dining room. But us, we built those rooms." I laughed. For the first time that day. Ruby, structural engineer. Beatrice, retired nurse. Introductions spread around the table. Harold, an emeritus professor of industrial materials. Ava, my engineering intern, whom I didn't expect to see here. It turned out she's the lighting manager's niece. Diana, an old neighbor of mine. A table without power, but with value. I pulled out my smartwatch and opened the vibration map I had set up the night before through small sensors placed around the conservatory ceiling. A habit no one understood, no one accepted. "What's that?" Ava whispered, staring at the oscillation graph. "I think this dome has a weak point. The load-bearing cables aren't up to the old standard. Could be just loose or..." I stopped when the numbers leapt suddenly. An abnormal vibration pulse, right where the technical box was located. The fireworks position. I was about to pull out my phone when the screen flashed, the DJ counting down. 5, 4. I stood up, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the red spot on the thermal map. 3. I started moving quickly toward the main floor. Not fast enough. 2. And then, Everett Whitaker, the family patriarch, rose quietly from the head table. People watched him as if the soul of the room had stirred. He walked toward me. Leaning on his cane, he stopped in front of me and bowed. "She saved your lives," he said. I received the invitation one late spring afternoon, when the light was just leaving the windows of my third-floor apartment in Milwaukee. An ordinary day. The train outside still hummed in the distance. The smell of fresh paint from the office below drifted up the hall, and I had just finished a routine inspection for a school project. The invitation was thick, cream-colored with a gold sheen like early pollen. Ornate embellishments, looping script. It stated my sister's name, Paige Carter, paired with Ethan Whitaker. Very beautiful, very formal, until I read the line beneath. Ruby Carter plus guest. My nose prickled, not exactly from emotion. Maybe a mingling of old sorrow and a fresh sting of irony. After everything, they still assumed I'd arrive with someone. They still assumed I couldn't enter a room without a male +1. They didn't know or didn't care that 3 years earlier I had quietly removed my engagement ring on a winter afternoon, and had lived quietly ever since. I set the invitation beside the sensor equipment I was tuning. Among circuits, bolts, and vibration chips, the invitation looked like something out of a world I had stopped trusting. Lavish weddings, unchanging vows, families that never cracked. 3 days later, Paige called. Her voice trembled. "You'll come, right?" she asked. "I know, it's not easy, but..." "I'll be there," I cut in gently. "You're the most important." "I just want you there," Paige whispered, as if avoiding anyone else in the house overhearing. "Even if everything is strange, I need you." I kept my promise. The engagement party was at a boutique hotel with a balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. A place of old money polish, quality materials, measured lighting, everyone in the right colors and tones. I arrived on time in a navy dress, hair pulled back, light makeup. The staff led me to a corner table. Martha Whitaker, the groom's mother, was already seated. She wore a cream silk blouse, 3 strands of pearls about her wrist, a cold expression but a camera-ready smile. "Ah, Ruby." She lifted her glass without standing. "We wondered whether you would come. Paige has been looking forward to it." "Hello, Mrs. Whitaker," I replied, polite but not sweet. "I came for Paige." "Of course," Martha said, glancing at her glass. "Ethan mentioned you work in the technical field. Construction, right? Must be interesting." "Structural safety," I answered briefly. "Work involving foundation checks, load connections, reinforcement systems." Martha nodded superficially, her gaze sliding past me. "Honestly, you should probably bring a hard hat to the upcoming wedding. Wouldn't that be fitting for your profession?" The remark landed light as wind but cut like a blade. I smiled faintly, offering no reply. Paige was walking toward me from across the room, her face glowing. She hugged me tightly as if grasping a lifeline in the cold air around us. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm scared they'll make you uncomfortable." I put my hand on her shoulder and squeezed. "I'm used to it." She looked at me as if wanting to apologize for something without a name. A week later, I received the event layout documents by email from the planners. Floor plans for Elm's Conservatory, emergency exit maps, and the main architectural drawings. Perhaps they assumed no one would scrutinize the details, but I did. I printed the technical drawings for the dome, a 1974 plan by architect Harold M. Lane. I'd seen his name in a college thesis. A meticulous man who never cut structural elements for the sake of looks. But the new drawings were off. I turned on the work light and stacked the sheets. The lines nearly matched, but the notes at the center of the dome had been revised. The primary support cables were reduced from 8 to 6. Secondary beams were specified in a lighter alloy instead of solid plated steel. I examined closely the amendment signed by Caleb Whitaker, the groom's uncle. I checked Chicago's building permit database. A recent repair permit had been approved surprisingly fast. The company responsible was W Systems Group, a subsidiary with a history of controversial bidding practices 2 years ago. The site supervisor listed was Caleb. I called an old contact on the technical committee. "Do you know who's overseeing the Elms Conservatory?" "Odd," my friend replied. "The original files belonged to Salt Klein, but they've been swapped out recently. Looks like there was some family-level interference." I put the phone down and stood quiet for a moment. The wedding melted away in my head. What remained was a dome that hadn't been checked for dynamic vibration, 300 guests, and indoor fireworks. A careless decision or a cunning financial move could kill people. I sent a 12-page report along with analytical diagrams to the wedding organizer's inbox, the audiovisual technical team, and the Whitaker household logistics assistant, warning that the entire roof truss system and the fire suppression system needed to be rechecked. I received no response. The next day, Paige called. Did you email the event company?" she asked. "Yeah," I answered. "I think they should recheck the dome structure. The area where the fireworks are set up doesn't meet standards." Ethan said they hired an inspection firm. Caleb is standing behind the safety assurances. "Did you read the name of the company?" I asked softly. "Sis," her voice choked. "Ethan's mom said you're making a fuss. She told me, don't spoil the wedding mood." I took a deep breath. I don't need thanks. But I can't stay silent when there's a problem. If they want the analysis, I'll explain it. "I trust you," Paige said, almost a whisper. "Just don't leave. I need you there." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I'll be there. But you have to promise if anything looks off, you'll get off the stage area." Immediately. Paige was silent, then quietly replied, "I promise." I hung up and went back to my desk. Beneath the drawings, inside the web of vibration sensor wiring, there was something harder to spot. A hunch. A kind of instinct I never ignore. Not because I feared being wrong, but because someone had died when I had stayed silent before. I would not let that happen again, whether at a wedding or anywhere else. I still remember that gray morning. The light that belonged to no season, simply gray. It wasn't raining, but the wind carried the smell of crushed cement and scorched steel straight into the lungs. The collapse scene was at a construction site in South Shore, Chicago. At 6:18 a.m., an alarm sounded from the second basement level of a central logistics project. Part of the roof pancaked onto an emergency exit, burying 4 laborers, a supervising engineer and a maintenance worker checking the fire suppression system. I was assigned as the field stabilization team leader for the NTSB Rapid Response Technical Unit. I was 30 then, had handled 9 federal-level scenes, 5 serious accidents and 2 partial bridge collapses. I was no longer shocked by the sound of cracking concrete or the sight of blood on the pavement. But that day there was something else. Something that had never happened before. And it was the thing that made me leave the agency forever. The second basement had partially collapsed, but the suspended floor had not yet fully failed. By initial calculation, we had 15 minutes before a complete collapse. The nearest trapped person lay inside a row of firewalls, about 8 meters in, the entry too narrow for rescue vehicles. 3 other engineers and I brought emergency shoring gear and crawled in through a fissure. The air was thick as smoke. The first person I found was a young worker with a broken leg, still breathing. We pulled him out on a soft stretcher. 2 others were dead. The fourth was an old man, hair white, his dark suit still dusted. He didn't cry out. He lay still, hands over his face, his left leg pinned under an H-shaped steel member weighing nearly half a ton. I knelt beside him, checked his pulse. It was there, cold but definite. When he opened his eyes, I saw a light in them like steel polished over years that hadn't dulled. "I'll get you out," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure he could hear. We had no crane. No portable lever. Only instinct and 4 folding shoring struts. I used a support plate to lift the steel inch by inch, bracing and wedging with wooden blocks. My teammates warned me to get out. The secondary beam was sagging. But I stayed. When the steel shifted enough, I threaded a rescue strap under his legs, wrapped it around his waist, signaled the pull team. His shoe scraped across cracked tile like a sharp sound to the ear. I slipped as dust cascaded down, but someone hauled me up. Then a secondary beam to the left collapsed. The spot where I had just been standing was gone by less than a minute. We got the old man out. No one knew his name then, just an elderly man found in the mechanical area. Later I learned he was Everett Whitaker. At the time I felt only 2 things. A person alive and a person gone. Mark. My fiancé of 11 months, the lead engineer heading the West Canopy analysis team for the project. He didn't need to be at the site that morning. But when I left the office, he said he'd swing by to bring me a jacket. I'd left it behind because I was in a hurry. We were less than 50 meters apart when the second concrete slab fell after the third aftershock. I couldn't turn. I only heard a dry crunch and a final sequence of sounds like something being severed that could never be rejoined. It took over 2 hours to find his body. They covered it as they carried it away. But I still recognized a small scratch on the brim of his hard hat, from the time he slipped on the stair fixing my plumbing. He told me not to replace it, keep it as a memento. The post-accident investigation concluded the cause was construction error and materials not meeting original design specifications. What cut me to the bone was the subcontractor supplying the secondary load cables, Thompson Ridge LC, was part of the Whitaker corporate satellite chain. Caleb Whitaker at that time worked in Whitaker Group's construction control office and had indirectly approved the bid package. They denied wrongdoing. No one was prosecuted. I, however, was summoned to disciplinary hearings for using an unapproved rescue procedure. I spent 6 weeks testifying, 18 pages of documents, 2 closed meetings, and received a denial letter for emotional damages. Mark's death had no one to hold accountable. 6 months later I resigned. No one held me back. The HR manager handed me a box of key cards and said, "You're still young." I left Washington, D.C., returned to Milwaukee with only the small apartment and a handful of clients I'd advised for free back when I was a student. I started over on local school projects and neighborhood rehabs, then opened RC Engineering Safety, a small office with me, an assistant, and a newly graduated young engineer. No sign on the door, no work on buildings taller than 15 stories, no government budgets. But we never ignored a crack. For 3 years I lived among numbers, drawings, and half-painted brick walls. I worked as if stopping for a day could cause someone's death. And I didn't think I would ever return to anything tied to the Whitaker empire. Until the day I received that wedding invitation. And saw Caleb Whitaker's name at the end of the structural amendment for the Elms Conservatory dome. I stood by the window a long time watching roof tiles catch streetlight, listening to the city that never asked me to wear the right dress or smile at the right moment. Then I went back to the desk, booted up my vibration sensor system I'd developed for my side projects, and silently promised, this time I would not let anyone hide the truth behind flutes of champagne and swaths of white silk. 6 days before the wedding, I sent the 12-page technical report to 3 email addresses: the event company, the audiovisual technical team, and the Whitaker logistics assistant. The document included photographs of the current dome condition, a repetitive vibration analysis, and a simulation of peak load when 300 people move simultaneously on the floor, combined with indoor fireworks fired at the tempered glass overhead. I kept the tone strictly professional. No conjecture. No judgment. Just facts, a risk assessment, and one simple recommendation. Do not install an indoor fireworks system until an independent inspector confirms the dome structure meets the latest OSHA dynamic load standards. 2 days later, I got a reply. A short email, no signature, no greeting. Just one line. The event structure has been inspected by an authorized entity. Please refrain from sending unnecessary documentation. The sender was Laura Whitmore, personal assistant to Mrs. Martha Whitaker. I quickly checked her background. She's Martha's niece on the maternal side and had worked as an event planner for an upscale hotel chain. No technical expertise. No authority to reject a safety recommendation. But as family, she could choose to ignore. I didn't reply. I didn't send more. But I started to act. On Thursday afternoon, I went to Elm's Conservatory under the pretense of checking a safety monitoring system that I had sponsored as a gift to my sister. An addendum written into a private card to Martha, signed by me, promising at minimum a vibration monitoring system for the dance floor to record motion for demographic and dynamic interaction research at large events. I wasn't lying. The equipment was genuinely for study and placing it was entirely legal. I even registered it on OSHA's public system under a trial verification code. When I arrived, the conservatory was in finishing mode. Lighting designers were stringing lights around the iron ribs, silicone adhesive still smelled strong, and the audio crew was testing subwoofers near the floor. I wore a hard hat and a reflective jacket like the other crew. No one paid attention. I walked the central floor and planted 8 vibration sensors around the perimeter of the support beams. 3 under support pedestals, 2 under the DJ area, 3 close to the floral display where guests would take photos. The sensors were as small as a lighter, covered with floor adhesive the same color. Without an installation schematic, no one would notice. I linked all of them to my phone and synced to my laptop at the office. From now until the end of the event, I would know precisely every shift in structural vibration. As I was securing the last sensor under the drum riser, I heard familiar footsteps. Alan Edmonds' leather shoes. A measured tread, the scent of oak moss cologne. Thin. Ruby. He leaned down, surprised but keeping his voice low. What are you doing here? I looked him in the eye without rushing to answer. Ethan is the sort of man who keeps polite manners above all. Even when faced with the unexpected, he stays gentle. Installing safety sensors, I said. Part of my wedding gift. He hesitated. About the email. I saw it. And? I asked directly. I don't have the expertise to assess it, he said, looking at the floor. Caleb insists everything's been handled. I sat up, wiped my hands. Have you ever read the original 1974 design documents? No. I can send them to you. Ethan pressed his lips, then nodded slightly. Send them to me privately. I smiled faintly. No one in that family gets much independence, do they? He didn't answer. He just stood there, silent, as if not speaking kept him from choosing a side. That evening I sent the original drawings plus my analysis to Ethan. No extra words. Whether he read them was up to him. But I'd placed a choice in his hands, look or look away. 3 days before the wedding, I ran into Douglas Whitaker, Ethan's father, at a pre-event meeting. I wasn't on the official guest list, but I appeared in the technical support roster. He shook my hand like he was greeting a small subcontractor. Light, proper, no warmth. Ruby, we understand your concerns, he said, pulling me aside. But everything is covered by insurance. I looked him squarely in the eye. And who insures an unexpected death? Douglas kept smiling, his eyes unchanged. Accidents are unfortunate. But if everyone lets emotion override process, the system won't function. I stepped back from the forced proximity. Emotion is what helped me save 4 people from a collapsing basement. His eyes narrowed. Maybe no one had ever told him that. I turned away, not waiting for him to answer. That evening, Paige came to my apartment just after the rain stopped. She wasn't wearing a wedding dress for fitting, no makeup, just an old sweatshirt and jeans. She sat down on the couch, clutching a pillow, and stared at me for a long time. I don't know what you're bracing against anymore, she whispered. I just want a smooth wedding. I don't want you to collapse in the middle of the reception, and I don't want to see that look on your face like someone's about to die. I sat beside her. I'm not bracing. I just see what others refuse to look at. And what if nothing happens? She asked. Then I'll stay silent. Like so many did before. I paused. But if something does happen, you won't get a chance to apologize. She hugged her knees and looked out the window. I'm tired, Ruby. Tired of being stuck between love and family. Between gratitude and feeling controlled. Between you and the rest of the world. I put my hand on her shoulder. You don't have to pick a side. You just need to listen to your instincts. You trust instincts? Not blindly. But I trust the data. And that glass dome isn't right. She rested her head on my shoulder. Her eyes weren't dry. Will you be there? Until the last song ends. You're not seriously planning to wear a hard hat on stage, are you? I laughed. I'll bring it, but I might not wear it. But if you do, only to wear it if someone needs saving. She gave a small, bittersweet laugh. The kind of laugh from someone who's beginning to understand the world she's stepping into isn't easy to trust when it's filled with people who share the groom's surname. That afternoon, sunlight slanted through the tall glass panes of the dome and reflected off the marble floor like a small light show. A breeze from the east garden drifted through the slightly open windows, carrying the scent of lavender and early blooming daffodils. The air glittered, perfect enough to make people let their guard down. But I didn't. I arrived nearly an hour before the invitation time to check data from the sensors and to observe the final floor layout. The fireworks wiring had been arranged in an arc around the center of the dance floor, directly beneath the dome's highest axis. From the tech corner where I stood, I could clearly see orange signal cables crisscrossed and taped with black tape. A makeshift setup not up to fire safety standards. I touched the small wireless earpiece in my collar and checked the signal. My phone displayed faint vibration traces around a temporary gas valve placed at the conservatory's side. A small spike had just appeared on the chart. Not immediately dangerous, but enough to make me sit up. I glanced around. Guests were beginning to arrive in greater numbers across the hall. Pale pastel dresses, polished brown leather shoes, eyes following each entrant as if this were a casting call for Whittaker bloodlines. I straightened my collar, stowed my phone, and walked straight toward table 19, the card calling it the Garden Corner Lounge. But I knew better. That's where they seat people who don't belong, or who can't be controlled. Ruby. Leon Briggs's voice was the first I heard as I pulled out a chair. I bet you're the last one who'd come to this table without looking around 3 times. I smiled and shook his hand. His skin was rough, work-worn. Veins stood out like exposed plans. No need to look around. I installed cameras, I said half-joking, half-true. You certainly did. Dana Morales, the county emergency director, sipped a lemon water, her gaze sharp behind dark glasses. Vibration sensors, thermal imaging, reflection frequency. I read the dashboard you sent and thought I was looking at a military lab report. Engineering, I replied. There's no such thing as overcaution. Ava Nguyen sat next to me, hair tied back, wearing a smart black dress, flipping through her technical notebook. She's the intern I took on straight out of school. She once asked me, "Why don't you work for a big firm?" I just smiled, because I want people to listen when I flag something. On my left was Professor Miles Grant, a prominent materials professor at Illinois State Tech, specializing in high-stress materials. He tapped the rim of his glass, eyes fixed on the dome. I modeled similar structures for a NASA study back in 1998, he said thoughtfully. But that dome wasn't designed for high dynamic loads, especially not those generated by fireworks. I nodded and handed him my latest vibration map on my phone. The gas valve is set right next to the audio equipment. One exposed wire is enough to create a pressure impulse that can break a critical connection, he finished for me, eyes still on the screen. Leon folded his arms and exhaled. This is just like the Elm Street incident in '82. They ignored my report. A week later the warehouse collapsed. And who died then? Dana asked. 3 people. A 6-year-old child. No one spoke for a moment. I opened my messaging app and typed to Paige, "Don't go into the backstage area while they're prepping the fireworks. There's an unusual heat spot. Meet me in the North Garden after photos." I sent it. No reply. I looked up across the hall. Paige was being led away by 3 makeup artists and a photographer. She turned to glance my way, then was spun away. Her phone lay somewhere in her silk robe pocket, no one paying attention. I turned to Dana. "I need you ready." If vibration crosses the threshold, you'll be the one coordinating the evacuation. Ready? She nodded. I have 2 people from the rapid response team in plain clothes in the hall. On the technical side, I said, Miles, if I need an on-the-spot verification, can you issue a confirmation? Pen-paper expertise, he smiled. Leon leaned toward me. If someone needs to be handcuffed, I brought cuffs. The kind for steel, not people. I laughed quietly, then looked up as the warm yellow lights draped the center. The coordinator's voice came over the mic. Guests, please take your seats. The bride and groom will be coming out for family photos. The dance floor began to fill. Expensive shoes, lace dresses, bow-tied neckties. People started to move toward the center. Just as the prelude music began, the chart on my phone spiked. The heat at the gas valve shot up. Simultaneously, vibrations at 3 dome support points doubled. I clenched my hands. A point's showing boundary deviation, I murmured. Maybe they're doing a final test of the firework system. Ava looked at me. What are you going to do? I am not going to let my sister die on her wedding day. I stood. Dana nodded slightly. The people at our table rose as if they were merely going to fetch drinks. But I knew, somewhere in the glittering hall, something was cracking. And not everyone hears the sound of what's about to break. When the clock in the hall neared 6 p.m., the whispering stopped. A line of servers in tails parted. From the main aisle, a lean but robust figure stepped out, leaning on a black cane inlaid with silver. Everett Whitaker. The room fell silent. I heard murmurs. He's actually here? Haven't seen Everett at a public event in years. I straightened. Not for his fame, but because a cold memory ran down my spine. Everett stopped mid-hall, looked up at the dome and scanned the room. His gaze landed on me. He stared as if he could see through the silk dress I wore into the steel-dusted past. Before I could turn away, he signaled his aide to guide him to my table. Carter, he nodded quietly, voice hoarse but clear. Ruby Carter. I returned the greeting, keeping my tone steady. A pleasure, Mr. Whitaker. He let out a short laugh, that metallic scrape of a laugh. Then he reached into his vest pocket and drew out a worn object. An orange hard hat with chipped paint, a cracked brim, the front scratched with the scrawl, RC. My chest tightened. This has been with me for 12 years, he said, setting it on the table. I still remember the shout through the dust. Push 2 more inches, hold tight. If not for that person, I wouldn't be sitting here. He didn't have to say it. I remembered. I bowed my head, hiding whatever I felt. I just did my job. No. You did more. You didn't run when the secondary beam trembled. You stayed to get an old man out. His eyes lit up. Tonight, I need to know if you still have that grit. I was silent. He motioned to an aide who handed me a thick envelope pushed toward me. Inside were internal documents, anonymous share tables, parallel insurance transactions, evidence that Caleb was listed as owner of a shell company. I skimmed and felt a chill. If a controlled incident occurred, that insurance company would pay out a massive sum. Part of the profit would flow back to Caleb. The dangerous scenario could have been planned. Everett sat opposite, breathing slow but his eyes fixed on me. Now give me an answer. Will you stay silent or will you do what you're supposed to do? I looked up without hesitation. Chief Dana. Dana set down her glass and grabbed her work phone, tapping quickly into her secure app. I watched her type the command. Activate ICS Level 2, covert not public. Lights blinked. Within 2 minutes I knew at least 4 rapid response personnel would move into position without making a scene. Everett smiled thinly and nodded as if a hypothesis had been confirmed. Good. I despise people who only stay quiet at weddings. I closed the packet and slipped it into my bag, but my eyes stayed on my phone. An alert popped up. Abnormal vibration detected. 0.6 Hz deviation at West Backstage exit. I zoomed into the thermal map. A small red spot right at the emergency exit leading to the mechanical area. That shouldn't exist. The schematic I'd seen last week showed that door as free opening, with no electrical system attached. I stood up. The west emergency exit has been fitted with an electric lock. Miles frowned. That's not in the records. Leon made a sound. An electric lock on an emergency exit? Who authorized that? I looked at Dana. If there's a fire or a roof collapse, the backstage will not open. They'll be trapped inside. Paige. I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang and rang, no answer. I sent a message, "Get out of the backstage now. The emergency exit is locked." No response. I faced Everett, voice low. "Who signed off on the new lock?" He shrugged, eyes burning with restrained anger. "Not me. But I can guess." I didn't need him to finish. A clear possibility rang in my head. Caleb had prepared a scenario that only I could see the outline of. I inhaled and returned to the table. "From now on we split tasks. Dana, keep ICS covert. Leon, find a route to the gas valve. Miles, monitor the dome. Ava, come with me. I need to check that backstage lock now." No one objected. We dispersed like harmless guests leaving a reception. Jazz still played, glasses still clinked. But beneath it, the numbers on the screen continued to thrum like a heartbeat warning of an approaching storm. Ava and I followed the corridor toward the west backstage. Yellow LED lights reflected off the polished tile floor, but at the far end my phone showed a blinking red dot, a heat alert right by the auxiliary gas valve. A chill ran down my spine, though the air still carried the rich floral scent from the main hall. When I reached the emergency exit, I stopped. A brand new electromagnetic lock had been securely mounted to the steel frame. The connector cable still bore installation marks less than a week old. I tapped the steel surface lightly. It rang with a dry clang. It couldn't be forced by hand in a few seconds. "Sis, footsteps," Ava whispered. I stepped back into the shadows. Two men in black suits with tiny earpieces walked past. They weren't the venue's official security. Their gait, their eyes, and the way they kept resting a hand on their belts made it clear they were a hired security detail. They stopped right in front of the door, checked the lock, then one of them spoke quietly into a mic. "The door is locked. The bride is still in the dressing room. No one can get out." I looked at Ava. She bit her lip, clutching her notebook, eyes wide. I signaled for silence. When the two men walked away, I stepped out. I checked the connection on my phone. The vibration alert kept rising, this time coming from the dome's center. The data ran in an uneven serrated line. I frowned. This didn't look like a natural incident, the way their paperwork always described. Then I saw a control command sent over the internal network. "Gas underalert mode." If this was the fake gas leak mode, the system would release white simulation smoke, guests would be evacuated in an orderly fashion, and the insurance company would record a valid infrastructure incident. That matched the hypothesis Everett had suggested to me. Caleb was preparing a controlled incident. But when I dug deeper, the return data told a different story. The smoke dispense command had been swapped for an unusual thermal activation sequence. In other words, when the fake gas alert triggered, the sprinkler system would be delayed by about 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, guests would panic from smoke, heat would spike from the fireworks test, and the load-bearing glass dome could vibrate enough to cause a partial collapse. I could hear my blood pounding in my ears. Caleb wasn't planning an orderly evacuation anymore. He wanted chaos. Meanwhile, across the hall, Ethan was pacing, trying to avoid the watchful eyes of his relatives. I saw him through a narrow window. He stopped by a speaker column, phone in hand as if checking a message. But Caleb's voice, still coming through an auxiliary speaker that hadn't been muted, cut straight into his ear. "Once the fake alarm goes off, smoke covers everything, sprinklers are delayed, it will look like an old structure failure. The insurer will pay. I don't want any more objections." Ethan stiffened. He gripped his phone, eyes wide, then stepped back from the area. His expression betrayed the split between his family and the truth he'd just heard. I watched him turn as if to look for Paige. But Paige wasn't out in the hall. I immediately understood she'd been kept backstage. I dialed Ethan. He picked up almost immediately. "Ruby?" "I heard something." "Caleb." "I know," I cut in. "Where's Paige?" "I don't see her. They said she was changing in the backstage area. The door's locked. Hired security is posted. You can't get in." There was a pause. I could hear his breath coming fast. "Ruby," he said quietly, voice shaking. "What should I do? If I blow the whistle, my whole family will call me a traitor. But if I stay quiet, then my sister could die," I said coldly. "And you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life." I heard him swallow. Then his voice dropped and steadied. Okay. I'll find a way to pull my mother away from the main area to keep her occupied. You get Paige out. The call ended. I turned to Ava. Prepare the technical papers. Evidence if we need it. You'll go with Miles and Leon and keep the data feed stable. I have to get backstage. Ava looked worried. Are you going to confront them directly? I don't have a choice. I tightened my grip on the phone, glanced one last time at the erratic vibration data on the screen, then hurried toward the backstage door where Paige was being held. Caleb, with his insurance scheme, believed everything was still under his control. I felt different. I'd stood in smoke and falling rubble before. I wasn't about to let history repeat at a wedding. Jazz music played under the glass dome, the ensemble preparing to cue the indoor fireworks. I pushed into the center of the room, heart pounding but voice steady. Stop the music. Cancel all indoor pyrotechnics now. The sound in the speakers hiccuped and the ballroom fell silent. 300 eyes turned toward me. Martha Whitaker set down her wine glass, a sardonic smile at her lips. Who do you think you are, ordering people around at my family's event? A sister who showed up at the wrong table, she sneered. A few scattered laughs erupted, but they died when Everett Whitaker, leaning on his cane, stepped forward. The whole room seemed to tense at his presence. He moved slowly to the center and stopped directly across from me. In his bright, steady gaze, Everett bowed slightly, a motion that left many guests open-mouthed. Tonight, everyone will listen to Ruby Carter, his voice carried. She is the emergency authority here. Your lives depend on her judgment. Murmurs rose and fell as rows of men in black suits, who had been seated among the guests, stood at once. Dana Morales stepped forward, holding up her federal badge. We have activated ICS Level 2. Please remain calm and move as directed. The giant LED screen behind the band switched instantaneously to display vibration graphs of the dome with jagged red warning lines. Beside it, a thermal map showing a bright abnormal zone near the gas valve storage. Guests froze. Breaths quickened, a few small cries were heard, but order returned as federal staff raised colored napkins and guided groups along the color-coded routes. I had prearranged the scheme. Blue napkins for the north section, yellow for the east, red for the west, white for the south. Douglas Whitaker stepped forward, his face angry but controlled. He looked at his father, then at me. Dad, what is this? Some outsider, a troublemaker, he began. Everett cut him off sharply. Douglas, shut up. If you have any Whitaker blood left, you'll understand. Reputation won't save you once a roof falls. From now on, follow her. Douglas froze. He wanted to argue, but Everett's stare silenced him. At last he nodded and retreated, signaling his staff to cooperate with the evacuation team. As people streamed out of the hall, I saw Caleb slipping toward a side door. He wore a blue suit, face taut, eyes flicking around. 2 federal officers blocked his path. Mr. Whitaker, please come with us. Caleb tried to resist but was restrained. I didn't have time to watch him. My phone flashed a new alert. The backstage door was still locked. Paige hadn't come out. I faced Ava, voice firm. Let's go. You follow me. We sprinted down the west corridor. Most guests had already been evacuated. Only the sound of hurried shoes and the metallic echoes from the rattling roof remained. Ava clutched her laptop bag, panting as she ran. Ruby, if the door is electric, how do we break it open? She asked. We'll cut power at the control panel. But first we need the right breaker box. As we neared, I heard pounding from inside. Ruby, can anyone hear me? Paige's voice came trembling. Paige, I'm here. Stay calm, we'll get you out. I examined the wall-mounted control box and found a newly installed unit with a security company sticker. I pried the cover off with a utility knife. A tangle of wires greeted me. Ava snatched a wiring diagram from her laptop, eyes darting across the schematic. The green wire with the white stripe, power feed to the lock, she said. I severed it. A spark flared, then a dry snap. The electronic lock clacked and the door popped open. Paige lunged out and threw herself into my arms, trembling, eyes wet. They locked me in. They said it was for security. I was so scared, she sobbed. I hugged her tight. You're okay. You're safe now. Ava handed Paige a bottle of water. I looked up at the warning lights on the dome. They were flashing red now with urgency. Time was running out. We have to get out of the conservatory now, I said. The roof won't hold much longer. Paige nodded hard, dabbing her eyes. I grabbed her hand and led them back down the corridor. Ahead, red lights and evacuation calls echoed. The LED graph in the main hall still jittered wildly, signaling a night about to shatter. And I, a person once seated at the fringe, had become the one standing at the fragile boundary. An alarm blared, harsh and insistent, mixed with metallic groans from the dome. Cracks spidered across the curved glass, tiny shards raining down like glass confetti. I yanked Paige toward the aisle, but the side door remained welded shut. The control panel had been brazed down and couldn't be opened normally. I scanned and spotted a steel bracing bar propped in a corner. I grabbed it, wedged it into the door gap and heaved with all my weight. The door shuddered but the hinge barely budged. Ava had the laptop open, hands trembling but eyes focused. "Ruby, I see the locking board on the auxiliary circuit." "I'm in," she said. "Hurry," I panted, sweat running down my back. Paige gasped behind me. "Ruby, I can't breathe. The air smells like something burning." I braced, threw my weight again. Metal screamed as a component fractured. At the same moment Ava whispered, "I've got control." The lock light flipped from red to green. Ava and I pulled together. The door slammed open. Paige tumbled out and I wrapped my arms around her. At that instant a sharp crack rang from above. A large glass panel split and then crashed down. The shards glinted like blades. "Get down," I shouted, pushing Paige flat to the floor and using my back to shield her. The impact blew across the marble. A shard embedded itself in a wall where we had just stood. A strong hand yanked me aside. Ethan. His face was pale, his suit torn at the shoulder, but his eyes burned with resolve. "I've got Paige," he said, hauling her to her feet. White smoke began pouring from the fake smoke system. Instead of dispersing evenly, it swirled into the central area, choking and disorienting the guests who hadn't evacuated. Panic rose in staccato shrieks. "Dana!" I yelled into the mic. Her voice came back urgent. "Venting in progress. Activating emergency venting. Open all auxiliary skylights to purge the smoke." A loud whoosh sounded, then the high vents above snapped open and began drawing the white smoke out. The crowd started to breathe easier and the flow of people continued to be guided out. I turned and saw Caleb at the end of the corridor, his hand trembling as he held an emergency control device, his finger poised over a red button. I knew immediately, that was Plan B, cut the power. If he pushed it, the lights, fans and even the venting would go down and chaos would erupt. I lunged forward and seized his hand just as his finger neared the button. We wrestled. The device slipped from his grip, fell to the floor and rolled to Everett Whitaker's feet. Everett, leaning on his cane, picked it up slowly. Behind him stood 2 law enforcement officers in jackets marked U.S. Marshal. He looked straight at Caleb, his voice cold. "Do you think I don't know? Here is your recording with the contractor, pressuring them to cut the redundant cables to save money and skim insurance profits." He signaled. One of the officers took out a recorder. Caleb's voice played back clearly. "Do it like I said, don't worry. If there's an incident, the insurer will pay. I have a stake. Everything will fit the plan." Caleb went pale. He snapped up and tried to run, but 2 marshals held him down and cuffed him on the spot. From across the room, Martha rushed over and collapsed, unconscious. Douglas froze, his face ashen as if the world around him had just fallen apart. Ethan still held Paige tightly, his eyes red. He looked up at me, then toward his grandfather. In that chaotic moment he whispered into my sister's ear, "We choose the truth, Paige. Even if it means giving up everything, I choose the truth." Paige broke down, burying her face in his shoulder. I stepped back and inhaled deeply. The air felt clearer. The venting system was working steadily and the dome stood despite its cracks. I knew the storm had passed, but the aftershocks would linger in every person present. After the chaotic night under the glass dome, Chicago's media ran the story everywhere. Photos of Caleb in handcuffs, Martha fainting amid high society guests, and Everett, cane in hand, appointing me to command were on the front pages of dozens of papers. More than 300 witnesses that night told the same story. A scheme to stage an accident for insurance payouts had been exposed at the wedding of the century. 1 week later, the federal prosecutor's office announced charges against Caleb and the hired security team for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, reckless endangerment, and plotting to endanger multiple lives. Major insurers temporarily pulled coverage from Whitaker Industries and opened civil investigations into suspicious prior payouts. Under pressure from shareholders and from his own father, Douglas submitted his resignation. He retreated in silence, his face noticeably older than on the wedding day. Martha could not avoid civil suits. A number of guests, including the mayor of Chicago, filed claims accusing her of knowingly concealing safety hazards. Despite his frailty, Everett presided over a special press conference. In front of dozens of cameras, he announced the formation of the Whitaker Resilience Fund, pledging to reorient the company back to its founding values. He presented an independent contract inviting me to serve as Director of Safety Ethics, with veto power over any project that failed to meet standards. Starting today, Everett said slowly, each word ringing clear, all Whitaker Industries projects must implement transparent real-time vibration and stress data systems. No one may hide a single number behind a glossy facade. Flashes from camera bulbs lit the hall. I stood beside him and quietly signed the contract, feeling the weight of his trust settle into my hands. Ethan came to find me after the press conference. He wore a plain shirt, no longer the polished scion in the tuxedo from the wedding. His eyes were sincere, his voice low. "Ruby, I have to apologize. Not only for letting my sister be dragged into that nightmare, but for staying silent too long. I know my family has problems and I used to avoid them. Now I want to change." I looked him in the eye. Apologies are easy to give, but change takes time. I can't erase the past wounds immediately, but if you're truly serious, we'll work together to reform Whitaker. Not for reputation, but for the workers who hang their lives on every beam and cable. He nodded firmly. I understand. Paige and I will leave the mansion. We want to start over somewhere simpler, away from the shadow of power. Paige appeared behind him, her hand clasping her husband's. She smiled gently, though her eyes still bore traces of swelling. "Ruby, because of you I'm still standing. I owe you a lifetime of gratitude. But more than anything, Ethan and I want a normal life, not one built on a rotten legacy." I hugged her and whispered, "You don't owe me. Just live true to yourself, that's enough." Time passed and the investigation continued, uncovering more layers of corruption. Fake insurance contracts and doctored safety inspection reports all traced back to Caleb. Justice found its course. One late afternoon I visited Everett at his lakefront apartment. He sat in a leather chair, the old orange hard hat marked RC beside him. He looked at me and with a brief but meaningful smile said, "I spent half a century as a businessman, but that night I saw a young engineer run in and save a whole ballroom. Ruby, you didn't just save people. You saved the Whitaker name." I took a breath, then decided to reveal something I had kept private for 2 years. I put a thick file on the table, clipped with trust documents. "Mr. Everett, after I left the agency, a group of victims, people who'd lost family to negligent construction, formed a quiet network. We've been quietly acquiring preferred shares of Whitaker Industries through a trust. Today we hold enough to veto risky contracts." Everett's eyes brightened. His knotted hands trembled but were steady. He smiled in a hoarse, moved way. "I always hoped for someone like you. Not just technical skill but vision and courage. You've outpaced me." I nodded. "I didn't do it alone. It's the voices of those who suffered. Now they have a say." Everett took my hand tightly and whispered, "Make it the new legacy." One early autumn morning I put the orange hard hat back on, RC still faint but legible, and walked onto a new construction site on the outskirts of Milwaukee. A large sign at the gate read, "Safety is not a cost, it's culture." The sound of drills, hammers, and workers calling out filled the air. I looked up and felt that not only had the wedding dome been saved, a foundation of trust was being rebuilt, stronger than any steel column. Looking back at everything, I realized the story isn't centered on a glass dome or vibration numbers. The heart of it is the choice people make. Stand for the truth or keep covering things up for personal gain. I chose the harder road, and it was the only path that allowed me to keep my integrity and protect those I love. What about you? If you were in my position, surrounded by powerful people laughing, yet holding proof that a collapse could happen, would you stay silent or speak up? I want to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. If this story touched you, follow the channel to catch the next chapters of our family's journey, full of storms and lessons. Maybe in some of those stories you'll find a piece of yourself.